Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. If you're new here, my name is Mel and I am a yarn dyer living on the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland. And if you're a returning viewer, then hi, and yet again I'm in a different location. My craft room is currently full of boxes full of Christmas decorations so that I can barely get stirred in there. And my desk is piled high with books because we're rearranging parts of the house and moving bookcases and such like, so it is almost impossible to get in there. But anyway, so I'm currently in my living room and at least it's relatively light in here. So if you are new here, then this is a crafting podcast, primarily knitting, usually mostly knitting. Occasionally other things get thrown in there depending on what takes my fancy at any one time. This episode will all be knitting, and I have, how many finished objects do I have? I have 2 finished objects, I have a couple of works in progress, and I think they're all new cast-ons bar one of them. And yep, so I'll just first of all tell you what I will do. First of all is tell you what I'm wearing, which often I'm not wearing knitwear on the podcast because in the house, if the house is warm, then I'm obviously not wearing a sweater, but I am today because it is quite cool and I've been living in this for the last couple of weeks. This is my Wild Posy sweater by designed by Melody Hoffman, and this is knit in Drops Air, and it is supposed to be knit with Lopi yarn, and I can't wear Lopi because it is very scratchy. Way too scratchy for me. So this is Drops Air, which is like a blown alpaca, and it is a kind of a single ply. It kind of looks like Lopi to a certain degree, but it's very soft and it is very warm and very lightweight, and it has this textured yoke to it, and I've knit full sleeves, a little looser than the original design called for, and yeah, I really like it. I also knit this longer than the original design called for too, which was slightly cropped. This is much longer, and I was almost regretting making it longer, but now that I've actually worn it for the last couple of weeks, I'm really happy I did. It's a nice throw on over, wear around the house, keep you cozy, and I'm really happy with it. In fact, I plan to knit a second one in a charcoal colour in the exact same yarn because I'm so pleased with how well it's come out. I mean, it's bobbling like anything because it's like single ply and it's alpaca, and alpaca is like really fluffy, and it's just, you know, it's getting quite bobbly already, but I'm, you know, I am in the house, nobody's going to see it, it doesn't really matter. Well, all you guys will see it. There is that. Never mind. So I'm going to start off now with my finished objects, and I'm struggling to get this sock to fit on this blocker because I made the blockers are slightly short, I would say, for my needs, but there we go. Now, first finished object is my Halloween socks. I did finish these in November rather than October, but that's okay. I made these as part of the Halloween sock along, along with Kirsty of Grenade Creations. You can tell I didn't get a lot or enough sleep last night. So these were my contribution to the sock along, and I knit these with yarn that I bought at Perth Festival of Yarn this year. The main body of the sock, we've got a bit of a strange shadow thing going on here. I'm not entirely sure why, because there's nothing could be casting the shadow. What is that? It must have been my camera. The yarn is by Fiberpunk, and the colourway is called Alpha Bars Knickers, and it's definitely my camera casting a shadow, so I do apologise. And it is this really lovely Halloween stripy sock yarn in a 75/25 merino nylon base. I do have the rest of the yarn to hand, and I think from what I can remember I used spot on 50 grams to knit the pair of socks, so I can knit another one in the same yarn at a later date, either with a different contrast toes and heels or I don't know, something else, we shall see. But I can knit a whole pair of socks if I choose to. The contrast yarn that I used is some that I dyed up myself, and I have a very small amount of that left, and I just dyed up, because, you know, yarn dyer, a black to match up with the black that was already in the stripes. And the base that I used was a undyed skein of Regia sock yarn, which is one of my favourite sock yarn bases, commercial sock yarn bases. So I just wound off, I think it was 20 grams of this, and dyed it to match up. But I didn't end up needing 20 grams, so that's fine. It can be used for something else. The pattern that I used is called the Anastasia Socks by, oh, let me remember, because the pattern itself, if I have it to hand, I do have it to hand because I'm knitting another pair of socks in the same design, but the pattern doesn't have a picture, or a very good picture, on the pattern. It is a free pattern, and it is by Pepperknit, who I believe is known as Minty Fresh on social media. And it has this gorgeous spiral effect on the sock, which you can't see brilliant. Oh, you can on the ankle here, but I've done a 2x2 rib at the top, relatively short for me actually, and I have done a toe up, heel flap and gusset with eye partridge just on the bottom of the heel, and then stockinette at the back, and a Turkish cast on. I've also done a eye partridge slip stitch on the ball of the foot too. And if I show you the other sock, which isn't on the blockers, you can kind of see that a little better in the ball of the foot there, and the heel here too. And if I hold the sock like that, you can also see the spiral on the top of the foot. The reason I did the slip stitches on the bottom, as usual, because it is a merino based sock yarn, and it makes them just that little bit more hard wearing. And I just knit them on my usual 2.25mm needles. Well, I say usual because I knit socks slightly different to what I used to. These were knit magic loop, which is used to be how I knit all of my socks, and on a 2.25mm circular. And recently, or certainly for the last year, maybe a little long, maybe the last couple of years, I knit most of my socks on a 9-inch circular, and I go down to a 2mm needle for that because I knit in the round looser, much looser gauge. So usually I would knit the toe and the heel and the cuff all on a 2.25mm needle magic loop, and then just switch to the 9-inch circular for the main body of the sock, like the foot and up the ankle too. But I do go down a needle size to do so. But because of the pattern on these, I decided to do them all magic loop. It started mostly because you're supposed to knit the socks in opposite spirals. So if I just get both of these socks and hold them alongside each other, you shall see that they spiral in opposite directions to each other. And the first sock that I did, the pattern had you making yarn overs and knit two together. And when I tried that on the 9-inch circular, I found it very, very awkward because of the way you knit two together. I'm going to twist the needle like this to poke through, and there wasn't enough kind of room to be able to do so. So I knit magic loop completely. And then when I did the second sock, I knit magic loop too also, but you're using yarn overs and SSK slip knit. When I came to do the ankle, I thought I'm going to try the 9-inch circular on the ankle for the SSK, and that was fine. But it does mean that the pattern on the ankles are slightly different. It is much bigger on this sock, which I did on the 9-inch circular, than it is on the ankle of the magic loop one, which is fine. It doesn't bother me at all. Actually, I will never notice them once I start wearing them. So when I came to knit the second pair of these, which I'll show very shortly, I decided to do them both in the same direction, and that's SSK, and then I can use a 9-inch circular to knit the socks, and that's what I'm doing. So my second finished object I showed on the previous episode, and it is a reknit. I ripped these out and reknit these, and it is the Through the Stones gauntlets, which I have completed now. I have gauntlet number 1, and I have, if I get them on the right way, I have gauntlet number 2, and they're not a kind of a hand warmer, they don't have a thumb hole, they just go over as a sleeve, as a gauntlet, and they are a cable knit, and they are based on the ones that Claire wears in season 1 of Outlander, and they're not shown brilliantly because of the shadow, but you can kind of see the cabling there. In fact, if I take them off I can bring them in a little bit closer. This shadow today is a bit of a pain, but I will work with what I've got. They're very nice, I love them. When I knit them the first time, I knit these on a 4.5mm needle, which is quite tight, as this is quite a heavy weight, Aran weight yarn, heavy Aran, and it is Drops Alaska. And I didn't really know a lot about gauge. I think it was 4 years ago I knit these, and they were my first cable knit project, in which I discovered I don't like doing cable, but I will do it in circumstances where I really want the item. And 4.5mm on a heavy Aran weight was small. They were tight. I mean, I could wear them, I could put them on, but they weren't comfortable, you know, like put them on and don't know what you're wearing them sort of thing. So I only wore them a couple of times, and I'd put thumb holes in and they were a bit small as well, whereas these, I have actually worn these since I made them. I done reknit them on a 6mm needle, and they're much more comfortable. They're just like kind of having sleeves on a sweater, and I put these on when I was wearing, I must have been wearing a 3/4 sleeve sweater, or it was just very cold in here. I think I had very cold fingers, and it's very warm in here. Well, it's not very warm, it's comfortable in here today, but it had been cold. So that is the Through the Stones gauntlets by, I can't read that, Carol McCarthy. There we go. So now we can move on to works in progress, whilst one of the cats, Willow, causes chaos behind me. So in my plans for winter knitting video, I mentioned a project that I started 2 years ago. I think it was the end of December of 2020, and it was a pair of socks, another pair of socks, you know, Christmas socks. And I finally finished sock number 1 2 years later, and I am currently working on sock number 2. I should probably put this on the sock blockers actually, so you can see a little better. The yarn is by, try and remember, well, the colourway is called the North Pole, and it is in a, is it the North Pole? I think it was part of a sock set, but I knit a pair of socks with this yarn already, and I'm using up what I have left. And the colourway is very pretty. It's this minty blue and green with pops of neon green and pinks and reds. I really loved it when I saw it, and it did come with a contrast red to match the red in this, which I used on the last pair for the socks and so on and so forth. The yarn I'm trying to find, I had to check on Ravelry. It is Biff Sugar Yarns, the dyer that did the main body of the yarn, and I am doing a pattern called the Little People Socks by Audrey Borrego, and I thought they just went well together. North Pole, Little People of the North Pole, perfect Christmas combination. And I have used her design in combination with my usual, well, part of my usual recipe for making socks. Because it is a merino nylon, I partridge slip stitch on the ball, and I partridge on the bottom of the heel, stockinette up the ankle, and a toe up gusset situation going on. I've made quite a long cuff at the top in 2x2 rib, and I've kind of put a stripe in there to kind of vaguely make them look like they're supposed to go together. And this is just which yarn is this one? This is not that one. No, it isn't. It's this one, which is Drops Fable in a red, which is looking quite bright red on camera, but it's actually more of a dark red, which matches up better with the speckles in the yarn. The pattern you can kind of see better on the sock, which I've only partly done, and it is this kind of stretchy, kind of slip stitch, waffly kind of effect going on. But it does actually use quite a lot of yarn because there are slip stitches on every other row. It has quite an unusual toe box, which I really like the design of, which has you increase just in the center with stockinette in the middle rather than increasing on the sides of the toe box, which I really like. It looks really effective. It looks a bit strange on this one because of the rail on the tip. I'll get the other one. Yes, you can kind of see it a little bit clearer, or it shows up a little better on this sock. And I found that unfortunately I have been knitting the second sock a little tighter gauge than this one. And the reason being is I am knitting magic loop for these two. Because there are so many purl stitches and so on, it's easier to knit on the bigger needles than it is on the tiny little tips. When I knit on straight needles or magic loop or a longer cable, I generally wrap the yarn around my finger once. And when I knit on a 9-inch circular, I will wrap the yarn twice because I am such a loose knitter on a 9-inch circular. But for some reason I've been wrapping my finger twice on the second sock, even though I'm using magic loop, so the beginning of the sock is quite a bit tighter than the first one. But it'll be fine because it's a sock and it'll stretch out. It just means that it looks like I haven't knit very much, and this took me ages to knit just that part. And I couldn't understand why, and then it dawned on me when I held the socks together that this one's a bit denser than the first one. So the pattern, like I said, is the Little People Socks by Audrey Borrego, also known as Yarn Flakes on social media, and I really like her designs. I think it tends to be the case where there are certain designers that you just really like pretty much everything that they bring out. I have a few favourites like Audrey Borrego or Elias Skindia, where you end up liking just like almost everything that they release, so I end up knitting an awful lot of their patterns. But hopefully I shall get these done relatively soon. I am working on another pair of socks which I am mostly finished, and then I can pick these back up and these can be my current working on pair of socks. I do have one other pair of socks I would like to knit during the kind of Christmas season, and they are a wintry Christmassy themed sock too. I will briefly show you the yarn for that, and that is with this yarn, which is called Gingerbread House by Siobhan's Crafts, and that will just be a vanilla sock though, so it'll be kind of just, I can just pick it up and go sort of thing. But that isn't until I've finished these socks and the other pair of socks, which I will show you now. They're not all socks, I promise, this episode. It's just the order I happen to be showing everything in today. So I'll just pop those down there and pick up the final pair of socks for this episode. And this is actually the second sock, which I'm going to have to be careful so I don't lose my stitches. And it is a candy stripe sock. The first one is already finished, and I will pop that on a blocker so that you can see it better. I don't know where I put my sock blocker. I found it. I got this on Etsy ages ago, and I don't think the seller's selling things anymore. And again, I've used the Anastasia socks by Pepperknit, and I have done them in this yarn, which is kind of like a I'd say candy stripe if it wasn't for the green. The green kind of stops it making just look like candy stripes. I'm not entirely sure what it reminds me of, but they are quite festive. The yarn is by West Yorkshire Spinners, and I believe it is called Candy Stripe. I think. Let's have a look. West Yorkshire, Candy Cane rather. So, you know, it still doesn't really look like a candy cane because it's red, it's got green in it. And whatever I have left over from this, I plan to make a pair of socks for my husband at some point, and I am going to do contrast toes and heels in a lime green, and then they will look like the Grinch socks, which I think, well, let's say it's perfect, but no, John really loves Christmas, but it still amuses me. The contrast I've used is this yarn that came in a pack of Christmas yarns that I ordered last year. It was a Christmas set by Serdor. No, it wasn't. It was, who was it? It was Stylecraft, and it was on their head over heels base, and I'm just trying to get the label. I think it's Rudolph, the colourway. Yeah, the colourway is Rudolph by Stylecraft, and it was a set of 4 yarns. The other ones were very much a darker red, more of a rich, not a burgundy red, but you know, a dark red. But this one is like screaming red, but it does match up very nicely with the West Yorkshire Spinners yarn. So because it's a more hard wearing commercial base, I've not needed to do the slip stitches on the bottom. I've just done Turkish cast on, done the pattern on the top of the foot, just a plain stockinette base of the foot, eye partridge stockinette, then spiraled the pattern around the ankle, and a 2x2 rib at the top. Really boring, I know. And a stretchy bind off. I'm not sure if it's that surprise, is it Judy's surprisingly stretchy bind off? I don't remember. When I learnt how to make a stretchy bind off, I don't think it had the person I learnt it off on YouTube. I don't think it said Judy's stretchy bind off. I'm not 100% sure, so I just call it a stretchy bind off. But I think it's, if not the same, then it's very similar. And I just have a little Christmas cake stitch marker that I made a few years ago on the end here. I love these, but I really need to put another little jump ring in between the clasp and the cake because it's a bit awkward to actually clip on, and I mean to do it all the time and then I forget. So yeah, that is the second pair of Anastasia socks, and the second one I am up to the heel. I have done the heel turn, and I'm about, I think I've just started doing the heel flap, and I think I knit sort of this much from here upwards on the heel last night, on top of some other knitting, lace knitting, that I will show you in a moment. So it's flying along. It won't take very long to knit this at all. A couple more days, maybe 3 days, and these will be off the needles. So that brings me to my final work in progress and new cast on. You've not seen this since I cast this on. I don't think I'd cast on in my last episode. In fact, I'm 100% certain I haven't. I am knitting a sweater that I didn't mention in my last episode, but the yarn I did. And I am knitting a sweater in this fabulous yarn that I got at Perth by Edelweiss Fibers, which is the speckly yarn here. This yarn, which I'm going to show, if I can get it to focus, is this one, and it is a merino nylon stellina base. As you can see, these sparkles on that, and it is the colourway Mountains. And this is Edelweiss Fibers, and I bought these in September. And in my winter knitting plans episode, I mentioned I was going to use this to knit a love note sweater, and it would be quite a, I would be struggling. Well, it would be fine, but it would be it would be cropped, and it would probably 3/4 sleeve. But I really wanted to be able to wear this more than just the summertime, because it is a very wintry, it reminds me of like snow on like evergreen trees and stuff like that, which is, every time I see snow on evergreen trees, I just like, my heart is there, you know, and it's like, oh, I love snow on evergreen trees. I watch a channel called Roaming Wild Rosie about a lady who is renovating a cabin in the woods in Sweden, and she's been doing it for a year now. I've been following her since right at the beginning, and it's just started snowing. They had this first snowfall there, and every time she has a video where there's snow on the conifers, not conifers, of course they're not conifers, the spruce and the evergreens around her, I really want to move to Sweden with snow. I mean, I wouldn't, and I couldn't because we're no longer in the EU, but snow on trees, on evergreens, it's just something about it. So originally I was going to do the Love Note sweater, but I would be really quite struggling because I only bought 2 skeins of it. She only had 2 skeins and I bought both. So I had to think, I had to look through my Ravelry queue, my Ravelry library, and I decided to make a second Zweig sweater by Caitlin Hunter. I would say my most worn garment, or the garment I am most proud of knitting, is my Zweig. It had lace, it had cable, it had the whole shebang, and it gets pulled out, I would say 80% of the time when I want to go to town and I want to throw something on and look presentable. I will just throw black jeans and my Zweig sweater over whatever t-shirt I've got on and look presentable. So I decided to make a second, because in doing so I can use a second yarn for the lace section. So if I show you the Zweig pattern, the picture on the pattern, it has this lace panel. You do a little bit of colour at the top, and then there's this lace panel. There's a bit of colour work top and bottom, and then it's just the main yarn for the rest of it. So what I've done is I've omitted doing the colour work at top and bottom, and I am just doing the lace panel. And in doing the lace panel, it means that I can use a different yarn for that section, and I can make a bigger garment, make my yarn go further. So what I've done so far is I have done the top section, and I've done all the short rows at the back, and you can see how the yarn is working up there. It's coming up lovely. We've got a bit of pooling going on here, and what I plan to do, if I can get it to work, is do intentional planned colour pooling for the main body, because although I love the little speckly bits, I really like it where you get a big chunk of the colour section kind of together, so it does kind of look like evergreen peeping through snow, which is why I fell in love with the yarn to begin with. The lace, I've gone with a plain undyed yarn for the lace work, and let me see if I'm not sure if it'll focus on the lace very well. Oh yeah, it's not too bad because it is in white. You can't see it brilliantly. Whoops. If I put my hand kind of behind the lace, you can see the lace is working up quite nicely. And the yarn I've used is an undyed merino tencel base, because tencel is whiter in colour than wool. So if I show, where is it? This is the undyed Regia sock yarn, and it is a wool sock yarn, which is kind of a creamy white, whereas it's not going to show very well on camera, but the tencel is a cooler white. It's a crisper white. It's just clearer. It's not 100% tencel, so there is an element of slightly off-white to it, but it is much whiter than the 100% or 75% wool. Also with the tencel gives it a shine. It is a sheen yarn, like most of the, well, I say most of the plant-based fibres, but it's not all of them. Cotton obviously is not very shiny, but things like the bamboo and tencel and things like that tend to have a bit of a shine to them, or like banana fibre or rose fibre have a bit of a shine to them. So yes, the tencel has a shine, which I thought would work really nice with the sparkle yarn. And because this yarn base, because of the green in it, obviously you get a little bit of dye, slight tint in the dye water, which will go into the background yarn. So this yarn isn't an overly warm toned background white, if that makes sense. So I didn't really want to use just a undyed wool with it. As you can see, there's quite a bit of contrast there between the main yarn and an undyed wool. But when you hold the tencel, it's a closer kind of tone of white to the background colour. My husband would say there's no difference, but then to him he loves green, but there's light green and there's dark green. I'm a yarn dyer, so you know there are lots and lots of different shades of green, just like there are lots of different shades of white. So the white works really nice with the cool white background of the main yarn. So I'm hoping I will get a fairly good size garment out of this. I'm not sure how long my sleeves will get to be, and I'm not sure how long the body will be. I'm planning on making it shorter than my first Zweig, which was more like I would say just below hip crease length, a little bit longer than that, maybe it's an inch or so below. I will be making it a little bit shorter than that, kind of so I can wear over a dress. I'm hoping it's long enough to wear over jeans, but I'm not going to sweat it if it doesn't. It can still be, the plan is to wear it with a skirt or with a dress, so slightly cropped is fine, and then I'll just basically knit the sleeves as long as I possibly can. The only other change I'm making is I'm knitting a bigger gauge. I'm knitting these on a 4mm needle when the first one was knit on a 3.5. My gauge is looser, which is fine, which again will make the yarn go that bit further. It will also have more drape than the original one. The first one I made a size too big, so I ended up steeking both side seams from the underarm down to the bottom. I took out 2 inches from both sides, and this time I've gone down one size in the pattern, but my gauge has gone up. So what I might do is, once I get to separating for the sleeves, I will then assess whether or not I want to reduce the stitch count down and maybe pick up less stitches under the arm, or just do some waist shaping to make it fit a little better. I don't really want it to be too fitted, this one, because it's kind of like it will go over a dress or a skirt, so I don't want it too fitted, but at the same time I don't want it to be too boxy. So I think I'm just going to judge it once I get to that point. But I am starting the lace now. I counted the stitches that I've done, the rows I've done so far, and I've done 1/5 of the pattern, which is about 1 inch, and I should have just enough of this yarn. And it is, I weighed it earlier, and it is going to be tight. There's going to be very little of this left over. I've done 1/5 of the lace work, and I've used just under 1/5 of what I have here. This is left over from knitting another Melody Hoffman pattern, actually, and it is a shawl pattern, Plumetis. It was the Plumetis shawl, and I have 59 grams, or had 59 grams when I started, and I'm hoping it is enough. It should be just. So that is all my items for this episode. It has been a little bit longer than I'd originally planned, but that's okay. I'm trying to think what I have coming up. We have Vlogmas coming up, obviously, and it is going to be pretty relaxed, and as I've said before, I'm not sure what the frequency will be. At least one a week, I would have thought, and I'm not going to push myself to do every day. It's just, it gets too much, and then it becomes unenjoyable. It's not fun anymore. And other than Vlogmas, I'm not sure how many videos I'll have coming up in December. I have plans for a couple of episodes towards the back of the month, during that kind of Christmas to New Year time. But probably from now to then, it'll mostly be Vlogmas. Maybe a podcast, like right towards the end too, sort of like towards the end of Vlogmas, or just after Vlogmas perhaps. But otherwise, we're just about getting ready to get ready for the holiday season, and we decided to start decorating and try to get as much done as possible before the Christmas season, instead of doing all the stuff, the have-to-dos, during the Christmas period and not being able to enjoy the Christmas period. like being able to sit down and knit and watch Christmas films. Can't do that because we've got to like make handmade presents, or we've got to decorate the living room, or we've got to get the kitchen ready, or all those sorts of things, instead of being able to relax and enjoy the Christmas season, just sit there with a glass of wine and the Christmas lights and stuff like that. So we decided to do all that stuff before the Christmas season, so that when Christmas, December basically, we can just kind of relax and enjoy it. Plus we always, I don't know if anybody else finds this, but you always think about Christmas is at the end of December. But it isn't, and this is why it creeps up on people. Christmas is not at the end of December. Christmas is the 3rd week in December, but for some reason you get it in your head that it's at the end of December. So when you get into, oh, it's Christmas at the end of the month, oh, it's fine, loads of time, before you know it, Christmas is here, because you've only reality got 2, maybe 3 weeks to get ready for Christmas, when you for some reason have it in your head it's like 4 or 5 weeks, and it's not. So having all the big bulky stuff done ready means that you can relax. So that's where I was going with that. I haven't had enough sleep. I am rabbiting on about Christmas decorations. But anyway, all that to say is I want to get everything finished, and then I can just kind of do all the nice things like baking Christmas cookies. I am itching to bake Christmas cookies, and like last night I could just fancied a cup of tea and a biscuit and didn't have any. And I was like, well, I could have made Christmas cookies. I should maybe do that this afternoon. Maybe I'll make some cookies. I don't know. I have a lot to cook later. I think I've babbled on a bit too much, and I am desperate now that I've mentioned it for a cup of tea. Okay, so I will see you in Vlogmas, and if I don't get another podcast out before Christmas, then I hope you have a very lovely one, however you spend the season, whether that be Christmas, Yule, or any of the other winter festivals that are happening at this time of year. Then I hope you have a fabulous time, and I shall see you on the next episode, if not before, in Vlogmas. Bye bye.